Yeah, we were playing cricket yesterday out the front, and I'm pretty sure I got heat stroke. Actually, an insane story. I was out the back of the house, hanging up some washing, and I kid you not, a meteorite fucking fell down and landed at my feet. I literally picked it up and it was roasting hot, and I was like, that is insane. And my mate came round, Michael, and his dad's a forensic scientist, and he drove around today. He's like, that didn't happen. That is insane if that happened. He's like, it's like, the odds of that happening is silly. And he came around, we were sitting out the front in the sun on this old, children's desk that I've got, put in the magnifying glass and the meteorite underneath it. And he confirmed it. I was like, that's insane. So I think I've got to go declare it to the government.
Do you actually?
Apparently anything that falls out of space in West Australia is owned by the government. So I think it's because they fucking make money off obviously selling minerals, but anything minerals, like mine it. I think it's just because it's interesting. They probably want it at the museum.
I feel like you've got to keep it though. You've got to kind of have that thing forever sitting on the mantelpiece.
That's what I'm thinking. It's so light. It's weird. It's like this porous rock with holes in it and sort of like tiny, but it's fucking hard as steel, like
almost like volcanic,
but light as a feather. Yeah, it is like that. It's weird.
Lucky it didn't hit you. Imagine if it had been a few inches the other way.
Literally, if it was like almost hit my foot, and I was like, I think it would have gone through my foot.
Man, it's crazy because they when they're coming into the atmosphere, they burn up, don't they? So that would have entered as a much bigger rock and then kind of just been eroded away.
Yeah, we've obviously, we started researching quite a bit on it, like all the different types of meteorites. We're like, what's this? But it's interesting.
I feel like we've got to talk this Jungle Book cover before we get into the record, man.
Yeah.
How long ago did you... Well, that was a couple months back now? You recorded that?
It was a couple of months back. Yeah, we recorded that one around about October, I think, or maybe a bit later than that. Yeah, but I had the idea since, I think, like February. I actually had a recording at home. I was sort of sitting on it because we originally were going to do Queens of the Stone Age, No One Knows, and we're like, we'll fucking nail that and get the rock kind of vibe. And we're like, is it just too forward? That's what everyone's expecting. So we thought, all right. And my sister said, you should do the Jungle Book. I think because it might have been even last year the remake came out, or the Christopher Walken version.
Oh yeah, 2016.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, Christopher Walken. Yeah, and so I'd watched that and I was like, I like that. That's decent. So I thought, it's literally the same drums as Mundungus. I just copied the drums over, put it into a new, new file session on Ableton. I think I started on bass and then got that weird little lick down at the start. It came out really well. It's probably my favourite vocals I've done, or a live take. I usually hate my voice. I'm like, it actually sounded all right. So I was kind of pleased with it.
Can you kind of learn things about your own sound when you take another song like that and kind of transplant it into the wacky and wonderful world of Psychedelic Porn Crumpets?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's something that I wouldn't mind doing again, actually, like doing the covers thing. Because I remember I've always hated covers, and I don't know why. I think it's like, unless it's like a studio version, or maybe just seeing someone live, for instance, their take. But I think it's just because that's how everyone starts learning, and you'd always just be like, this is my version of this song, this is my version of that song. And so I've always been like, I'm a big fan of original content. So, but after I listened to the Flaming Lips cover the Beatles, I think that was the first time I was like, this is sick. Like the way they sort of really made that their own. And there's been obviously some great covers, throughout the time, but everyone sort of slows them down or doesn't really beef them up. So I kind of was like, all right, how do we make something big band, jazz, almost that swing kind of style, and really give it some 20s vibe, but in a rock sort of sense, or in a psych sort of sense. So yeah, it was a lot of pog sort of at the back end of that track. We actually got a tick of approval from, is his name Kipling? The guy who wrote the song for the original Jungle Book movie. Oh,
one of the two brothers.
It was a Kipling. Someone who wrote it was called Kipling. I think his name was. Anyway, one of the descendants he emailed us and was like, I approve. It was like, well done, which is nuts.
Fan of the band.
Yeah, insane.
Is it? I was just thinking there. You know what we were speaking about this idea of taking a song and kind of making it your own and putting your own personality onto it. Is it a similar thing at all? You know, when you take a real world experience and you put it in a song, because it does kind of shift a little bit once you put it, like we're saying, you know, that weird and wonderful world of Psychedelic Porn Crumpets. When you put it into that technical soundscape.
Yeah, I think so. I suppose for me, it's almost like I think all music is a memory, or at least for me, it's almost like a weird diary, like an insert. Like this happened on tour, and I don't really like getting fictional. So it's almost like things that do happen sort of do create you as a person and create where you're heading musically as well. Like what direction do you want to take? And I know, like for instance, I'll be sitting playing guitar for like a couple of hours, writing some weird acoustic thing, and then the back of my head, it's like, well, what am I doing? Like, is this what I want to be playing, or is it sort of does it encapsulate me? And then, I mean, everyone's got 1,000 personalities. You don't just have one side of style and be like, all right, I'm just punk. I only listen to punk. I do that, else you sort of wouldn't grow as a person. So yeah, I think just because when we are on tour, and I suppose the last couple of years has been the band, I don't even feel like I've grown up since I've been like 21 or whatever. It's weird. I'm like now 28, like living my 18-year-old dream, or my 15-year-old dream. And I'm sort of like, what, will I ever grow up? But it's still fun, which I think is, if I can still keep making that real life experience sound like our weekends, then I think that's, for me, it's like job done.
Yeah, that's funny. I was speaking to Cameron Avery a few months back, you know, the guy that plays in Tame.
Yeah.
He came on the podcast
true.
and he said exactly the same thing. He said you almost kind of get frozen, because I think he's early 30s now, and he said he still feels like he hasn't grown up as much of all of his friends that weren't in bands.
Yeah, mate, the amount of times I've been pulled over by one of my friends and be like, mate, you got to grow up. You're like, fucking, we're the same age. But they are, I think, because everyone's, very fortunate. They sort of don't have to do the 9 to 5 or even really focus on work in a sense of being worried. I mean, I'm always worried about if music, and what if this happens or that happens or blah blah blah, and what if you forget how to write. But I think as soon as you sort of get rid of that, you're always sort of the first point of call. If someone goes out, they're like, oh, I know Jack's not doing anything, so I'll hit Jack up, and you're like, you're free for a bit, and then literally you're just out like 7 days a week, or you're playing golf, or you've always got time, or but I mean, I do have a lot of days where obviously there's writing sessions or interviews or whatever, but I still have a day, which is nice. It's not like I've never got a period where I feel like I'm completely swamped. And I think because of that, and almost a carefree attitude towards life, days just sort of blend, and you don't have to think as much and only think about one thing. Because I'd say I've definitely matured as a musician, but a musician isn't. I mean, what even is a musician? It's like it's not like, I don't know. At the end of it, the people go down with the ship on the Titanic. So that's basically where we rank as in the social scale of things.
I feel what's kind of Australia's approach to that in terms of how they value musicians? Because if you look at somewhere like France, I think maybe Germany a little bit as well, you know, subsidising and kind of encouraging that side of the culture. Yeah,
they really look after them, don't they? I remember we toured with a band in France, actually. I think it's a few times that we've been on tour, and their whole year and their manager's wages paid for, and they get money, obviously like a grant. And we get grants here, but it might be for like $1,000, or maybe if you get a big one, it'd be like maybe 5,000, 10,000 if you got like an album or a plan or blah. Like they do help out here, which is really good. And the new government that is in place at the moment, I think they've put in a bunch more money, which is amazing for artists who, I mean, I think one thing is like, you get paid really well in Australia from music, regardless of sort of numbers. So say if you put a gig on and it's $10 for a show, you generally get that $10. Like you might pay $1 fee for the hire of the venue, and they make the money on the bar and you take your money off door revenue. Whereas in England, or when we went to France, we played a 500 cap was it 400 or 500 cap room in Paris, sold the place out, and after paying the promoter, the venue hire, 50% tax because it's like not a treaty with Australia. We ended up with $30. And it was like, how the hell could you be a touring band and sort of do that? And I mean, 500 cap, if we did that, it was on like a €20 ticket. So that in Australia, that's 10 grand. But we ended up making $30. And so if in Australia, you can really do a tour here. Say there's like 5 major cities, or maybe 6 if you include sort of like head down and do some more regional places. You could do a tour, 500 cap rooms on a $20 ticket and make 50 grand or 60 grand and then exclude flights, and you're coming in profit. And that's from 5 or 6 shows. Whereas in Europe, you sort of do, I think the reason they probably do need the grant a bit more is because, I mean, I don't know how they've even set up music in Europe, and in America it's the same. It seems like the bands are just getting the dregs of whoever's making all the money. I think a promoter in Australia is not a thing. There's like, we just use, we got Facebook, or you sort of tell people, or you promote your own shows.
I mean, it feels like a hangover from the old industry, doesn't it? It feels like something that's less relevant than it once was.
Exactly. You've gone digital. The world's gone digital. Your music's fucking digital, and it's free, so you're not making any money from that. And then you've still got a guy or a bunch of people. There's venue promoter who hires a promoter, who then hires someone else to work door, and then you've got to pay. What are they called? Booking agent.
Oh, booking agent.
Booking agent. And but the booking agent will hire a French booking agent. So you go 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%, 50% tax, 10% management, and then you've got nothing. And and you're paying for the van and everything, flights. So it is a weird industry, touring. I think one day, hopefully, if everyone starts doing the Australian way, I mean, there'd be more bands, there'd be more music, they could afford to do more records, and it's sort of a win-win for everyone, really. It seems like a way to boost the industry.
I mean, like you said, boosting it overall.
Yeah, everyone wins, apart from a promoter.
Before we get too far away from the Jungle Book, though, and Disney films, there was something else I wanted to touch upon in relation to Disney films, which was there an instance when Luke once thought he was Rafiki?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, he did. It was actually the first time. I don't even think Porn Crumpets we hadn't even jammed yet, I don't think. And we were down south in Denmark, and that's what the song Denmark was about, Van Gogh and Gone. Yeah, we went down there to record an album for Luke's band at the time, which was called Golden Slums. And the first night we ended up taking mushrooms and didn't get any writing done. And second night I can't remember what, we had some pills. And the third night we decided to take acid. And we were like, we hadn't written a song or anything, or I don't even think we had the computer plugged in. It was the daytime. We started tripping pretty early. And Luke had been out in the paddock. It's one of the most beautiful parts of the world down south in Denmark. It's just green fields that literally meet the ocean in these pristine beaches. And we were staying on this cow sort of farm. So just green grass, like lush, like perfect weather, like 25 degrees, like nice summer day, no breeze or anything. Luke thought, he would carry this big stick and had been staring at the sun the whole day because he just thought that he was like, look at the ripples around the sun. And me and Rory, like our friend, found him, like, what are you doing? Have you been staring at the sun all day? And he had blisters all on his lips and all on his face. And he thought he was Rafiki, and we were like, you need some water. And he was like, water, and trying to lead himself to water. And he thought he was Rafiki, and it was, that was probably still one of the funniest stories. Yeah, that was hilarious.
Oh, man. Didn't you guys take acid with Tony Hawk one time as well?
We didn't take it with Tony Hawk. We were on acid.
You were on acid with Tony.
Yeah, yeah. No, that was down at Desert Days, but that was unbelievable meeting him, because about 5 minutes earlier, Flying Lotus rocked up on like a golf buggy. He was getting dropped off to his green room. And I was like, oh my God, that's Flying Lotus. Like, I'm going to shake his hand. And it was sort of back in the day when you could just approach someone and shake their hand. And
back in the good old days.
Yeah, that was it. I was like, how you doing, Mr. Lotus? Or something like that. And then he was like, hey, mate. I think I just muttered, like, I love your music. Looking forward to seeing you. So it wasn't like a lot, but I just remember being like, holy fuck, like, that's one of my heroes. we walked back into our trailer, and Devo had come into our green room, and he knocked on the door. It's like they're pretty old now. It was weird to see them. So you just used to see them with their like red bucket hats on, or the little Lego hats, or whatever they got, the plant pot things. And he was like, "Oh, we've just this might be our last show. So we've bought a bunch of wine that we've made from our Napa Valley winery. Would you like to come and drink some rosé with us?" Fuck yeah! Like that's amazing. And as we turned the corner to go sort of towards their sort of little area they've got at the backstage bit, Tony Hawk was there, and Rich just ran up to him and was like, "Tony fucking Hawk!" And then we were just like, "Holy shit!" Just talk, and he was like, "Oh, like, who are you guys here to see?" And I just pretty much listed the entire lineup. Just that was the best festival I've been to. And he said his wife listened to us and was a fan, which to us was like, no way. Like, he knew who we were. Yeah, mad.
That's great. Where's he based now? Is he over in Australia?
I think he's still in LA. I think he's a California man, isn't he?
Where was that festival then?
That was in California. Yeah, that was
okay.
It was sort of out near Desert Day. I think the first one there was Joshua Tree, but it was just about an hour south of LA. So sort of around the more desert. It was beautiful. There was right on a lake, and you could swim in the lake. I mean, there was Temples, Flaming Lips, Flying Lotus headline one night, and so many, like, all the new bands as well. Like, was it Dive were playing, Wand were playing, Crumb were playing, Black Angels were playing. Yeah, it was sick. Even Wu-Tang headlined.
Really? Whoa.
Yeah, they played one night.
We got to come back to Denmark. We mentioned it a couple minutes back because I'm interested in the vocals on that. Was an accident, right? The kind of choppy thing you're doing.
Yeah, it's a function on guitar rig, and I had a guitar going through that channel, and I left it on accidentally. I just copied and pasted it, and I think I was going to do another one. I swapped it over and didn't realise the vocals were on that channel. I started singing. It was like sort of syncopated. I was like, "What the fuck's this?" I was trying to go into sort of the back end of it. Like, what? Because I think what was different about that first record was you can just hear me sort of trialing and figuring out how shit worked, and a lot of the vocals, there isn't just one style of vocal setting. It's like everything is different. And I think now it's like a lot of the newer stuff is like, I'm sort of like, all right, I think that's my voice, it sounds like that, and I'm sort of happy with that sort of distorted sound. But with Denmark, yeah, it was such a sort of happy mistake that because originally when we sent it to Jelly, the mixer who was working on that album, he was like, "You can't do that." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "You can't do that." I was like, "No, but it's like, it's just weird." And he was like, "All right, well, I'll try it and I'll see where we go." And he sort of cut all the syncopation out. And at the time I was just too nervous to sort of be like, I think it should sound like this, but was sort of like, okay. And Rish was like, "Nah, it's got to go. It's like that fucking syncopated bit's got to be back in. It's like glitching out and it's in time." And I was like, okay. And we sort of, I think that was the time when me and Jelly sort of became friends, because before that it was like he was just working on our record, and then he was like, "All right, if you want to come round between 2 and 5, blah blah blah." And I think every album since that, it's like I don't even hand him anything. It's like I would just literally be around his house from 2 till 5, and then we're tweaking every single detail, and it's great. It's a way better way to work with someone.
Yeah. Just you could just build up that relationship. Yeah,
it was nice. I think, I couldn't work with anyone else. It would be, it feels nice. We kind of get each other's flavour or approach to music, which is nice.
Yeah, were there any accidents like what happened on Denmark, where you do something unexpectedly and don't mean to, that happened on the new record?
All the time. I think that's the only way I really work, is trial and error. A good accident that seems to happen every record is my amp will die, but there's like a almost famous saying with guitar amps, it's like, it's starting to sound really good, it's going to break soon. So you sort of have a couple of days or periods where it sounds like it's got a hole in it. I don't even know how to describe it, where it's kind of crackly and it's got this sort of natural cut off to the sound of the guitar, so you're like not even really putting distortion through it, and that seems to happen a fair bit. Another one was the glitch, like that sort of sound that I've completely built the whole album around, was just me working out how to I always go to town quantizing, which I think is, some people say it's blasphemous. Some people are like, well, if you've got that technology, use it. I'm sort of on the latter half of that, where I'm just like, well, I'll just go to town. And there's a function in Ableton where it's like Beats mode or Complex Pro. And usually you just use that Complex Pro sort of style because it's going to make everything smooth and it doesn't sound warped. But the great thing in Beats mode is it thinks it's MIDI. And so you're putting through your guitars and you're putting through vocals or anything naturally recorded, and it warps the fuck out of it. And if you put it up an octave, it sounds like an organ, or it sounds like it's just, I don't know, it's like a digital glitch. And I remember having that on Digital Hunger and be like, fuck, that's the best thing I've ever heard, and sort of utilised it as an actual sound. And I think as soon as I did that, I was like, wouldn't it be cool to do a whole album like that and sort of utilise that as the main focus? And that pretty much is what SHYGA is. And I think I kind of wish that I didn't go as excessive as I did in certain parts, but I've given it a concept which I think works to back myself up on why I did do that. So
makes it cohesive. And the other thing is it almost gives the whole record this slightly futuristic edge. Yeah,
well, that's the original concept was supposed to be a guy called Norton Gavin, who was a fictional character who we were going to create his greatest hits. He's like this old salty, washed up rock dog who's no one's heard his music before, but everyone in Australia thinks he's great. So it would sort of be like this sort of Spinal Tap-ish thing, and I started writing all this music for like what a 70s rock album would sound like. And it sort of got to the point where I was like, I can't do this idea. It's like, if no one gets it, it's just a bad meme and it'll just be shit. So I sort of changed it, or showed Rish what I had, and I was like, what do you think of this album? And I pretty much showed him what I thought was the finished record in about March. And he was like, I like it, but I think there's about 4 or 5 different album concepts here. So we were like, well, I like Mundungus, I like Mr. Prism, I like Pukebox. Let's focus on that as the sort of style of the record. And as soon as we had that meeting and we sort of had that discussion, I was like, fuck, it was just almost clicked. I was like, that's it. And at the same time, I was watching, do you know all that deep fake stuff in the Google Deep Dream? And it's like,
where you put someone's face in someone else's.
Yeah. And it's like the AI just predict. And there's that Google Deep Dream where it's like making up shapes and it's trying to predict. It's like the internet looking in on itself, trying to work out what it's seeing and what the hell's going on. So like the concept quickly became like a deep fake AI trying to write a 70s album. And I was like, and that kind of gave the concept of me using all these glitches a theme. So it wasn't like when someone's like, oh, I hate how I did it. It's like, no, like, it's because it's supposed to be a computer trying to make music. And I thought that was funny, but also a kind of weird challenge. And it was like, but it had to be narrated by a drunk bloke. So it was like, that was the sort of, the catch at the end, which I thought gave it a sort of hint of comedy rather than diving into being like Brian Eno and being like, this is full concept. But I thought it was a good way to sort of move forward from what we'd done previously and keep it sounded just entertaining and intriguing.
Once you have that idea, does it almost start a chain reaction that then kind of carries through all the songs that you have? Yeah,
I think that I had a period where I was like, this is shit, like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, I don't even know how to play guitar, I don't know how to write a song, and then there was like this week where I think I wrote Mango Terrarium, Tripolysor and Sawtooth Monkfish in like 4 or 5 days. It was just like bang, bang, bang. And I was like, wow, like where did that come from? And I like generally don't smoke weed at all. And I'd had a joint like with my brother and was so baked. I was like, fuck, like, and it was weird that I just was so creative for like 3 days. But I think like if I smoked weed like all the time, I'd just be an absolute nonce. I'd just be gone like. I wouldn't get anything done. But it was almost just that sort of looking at the same problem I had, just sort of from a different mindset. It just really opened up, and I was like, everything that I was trying to be smart about and being like, all these time changes and the drums have to be this, and I sort of just scrapped it and was like, what's just fun? Like, what is fun to me? How do I make this childish, playful sound like intriguing for someone to just, who's probably not listened to Porn Crumpets before, have a good time? And I think I wanted to make it accessible as well, which was something I think I could have gone in two ways. Like, at the moment, I'm sort of completely opposite headspace. So I was like, oh no, now I've got to try and write something that makes me seem intelligent. But I don't know. I don't really want to get caught up in that too much.
No. Well, what were the three songs, sorry, that you said that you wrote in the burst?
Oh, it was Mango Terrarium, Tripolosaur, and or Tripolsaur, or whatever you want to call it, and Sawtooth Monkfish.
Kind of scattered about the record to some extent, but it's interesting when you kind of look at the track listing, because a lot of the songs that kind of sit next to each other can almost be grouped into pairs, like either thematically or sonically, like Sawtooth Monkfish and Tripolosaur are all both like animals.
Yeah.
Glitter and glitter, glitter bug and more glitter, Puke Box and Midungus, and then Big DJ kind of leading into Tally Ho, and you've got other bits and bobs. Why do you think that is that you can kind of group them like that? Do you write songs in bursts, like tradition like you did there, or?
Yeah, I think there's like, that was probably rare. Like, I don't think I've done that before where it's like in such a quick time frame where it was like, I mean, I definitely write songs. I probably write 2 songs, maybe 2 or 3 songs a week. And if they're good or not, it depends. It's like, I might have one idea of one of those songs where I'm like, I'd really like that riff, but I don't know what I've done with the vocals, or the drums sound weird. And then I'll always try and finish them, because I hate getting like a verse and chorus in and not extending the sort of field of view that you're trying to push. So the sort of, I don't know, giving myself a bit more time, like, or a day or two. If I'm not liking the song in like 2 days, I'll scrap it, and I'll be like, it like might go away, and then I might be in the shower one day or something, or just like out, and I'll be like, oh, what's that riff? I'm like, actually, that's from that song that I was doing before, and I was like, oh, what if I pair that with this? And it sort of then becomes, because I put the time into it, maybe that week or months ago, it sort of comes and naturally back into your sort of psyche or whatever, and you're like, all right, now I can build off that. Or you might not write something till a year later for things to work. Like Glitterbug and Puke Box was sort of not B-sides from whatchamacallit, but they were just songs I hadn't finished and sort of had left and rested, which I've got heaps of material sort of like that, but then never come back. And usually, I think the good thing about an album is obviously I get to choose what people listen to, but also if I'd put out the linear progression of, like, say the first song I wrote in that album process to the last one, you'd probably hear it all blend together, and a lot of the riffs sound similar, a lot of the drum beats are probably the same, and maybe the vocal patterns are thematically similar. So it's sort of like when you like sort of do that decimation of tracks, and you're like, I'll take 1 and 14 and 21. It's almost like a lottery, but they're obviously the best songs that I think work. But with SHYGA, I sort of thought more about the album in that sense. So I was like, how does this flow with it? It's like you said, it was sort of more paired with whatever it's called, fucking saw monk toothfish, yeah, and Tripolosaur, and try and blend it all together so it sounded cohesive and a bit more of a linear progression.
What is a Tripolosaur?
I think it was like someone who thinks so much. Like, it was like, because I remember like a bipolar bear would be like, just fucking stupid name for thinking 3 things at once, or having conflicted ideas, but a dinosaur sounds big. But then everyone, because I didn't even think about it at the time, it says trip, so you're like, everyone instinctively goes Tripolosaur, so, which is still fine.
It's interesting as well that Puke Box was one that was originally, or it kind of, was gestating around the time of the last record, because it feels like one that is completely emblematic of the soundscape of this album. The way, you kind of have the digital textures the whole way through, and then it's almost like it's fraying digitally at either end, if that makes sense. So the way it kind of peters away with the glitchiness. Yeah,
I think that, for me, was the song that I was like, that is the theme of the record. Like, because I dabbled in it in, I think you can hear it in, obviously Digital Hunger has a lot of it, and then Desi's Adventure, that last song, where it's sort of utilising it more, but not in riffs, in chord patterns. I think it must have been around the same sort of period where I was writing Puke Box, and I was like, all right, sweet, like, I'll do that trick that I did for Digital Hunger on this and see if it works. And then I don't think I did it that much for songs in between, but then as soon as I sort of had, like, Mundungus definitely doesn't have any of that. But then when Prism came round, it was like, I'll use that trick. And then it was like, literally, I used it as an instrument. It was like, after that, it was like, all right, sweet, let's use it. It was like Pukebox was sort of the stepping stone into creating that concept.
And then once you have that, it almost becomes like another tool.
Exactly, that's what I use. I think because it went. Sometimes I'm like, the production's fucking awful, but I'm like, I wish I could have cut down bits and pieces. Like, there's no point in having this really heavy driving guitar. It makes it sound smaller. When in my head, I'm like, oh, I'm making it sound massive. So I've sort of learned that whole process of sort of going through that. The mixing of that album was a big learning curve, because usually I sort of go home and go, I'll add more. But this time around, I was like, I'll take stuff away, and I probably should have taken more out. But I think going into the next record afterwards, it's like, not minimal. I think it's just, need to get the idea across in the best way possible. So when I originally had Pukebox, it was like so warped, and there was so much going on. And I just eventually was like, take out all these guitars and just have 3. And just have the harmonies underneath one, a glitch one, and then that was sort of basically the idea of it. And I probably didn't even need this second guitar. I could have just been a glitch one, bass line, and something else underneath. Like, because I think someone said, I think I was mixing it with Jelly, is like the human brain can only hear 3 melodies at once before it just sounds like clutter. And as soon as he fucking told me that, I was like, a challenge. I was like, oh, I didn't know I could do 4. Yeah, and then it took over me for a while, that one, trying to make that happen.
I didn't realise that. That's interesting.
It is. I'll tell you something else that's interesting. It was fucking mad. I was talking to this guy the other day about bass frequencies, because I always sort of start on bass first, like, or I'll have a riff, might play the guitar. As soon as I get the drums down, the bass comes in second. Just, it seems like a lot easier to sort of build from there. Or if you're trying to work out a really weird chord, it might be easier to just get that one note of the bass down, and you can just make it sound as fat as possible. But so we started talking about bass, and then he was like, oh, I actually studied bass at university. I was like, what? Like, what a weird thing. It's like, yeah, like, so, but he studied how elephants communicate through their stomach or through bass frequencies. And then I was like, well, that's interesting. He's like, yeah, well, he was telling me about how in the 90s, when the rave culture was coming up, that it was only attracting males, and they were like, they obviously couldn't work out why males loved this music, but females didn't. And someone said, why don't we drop the frequency of the bass to better shape a female's wider hips and sort of that torso so it resonates differently. And they literally lowered the bass, and all of a sudden they had more females at raves, which is insane. And then we started it is fascinating, isn't it? And I was like, what if you could just, because then he started talking about, obviously the Americans were working on a bass bomb or something like that. It was like frequency bombs.
The sound bomb that could shatter a city.
Yeah, that's right. And he was talking about that, and I was like, it's actually hectic how sort of minimal our knowledge of sound and frequency is in music. Like, there's probably reasons why you like songs and someone else doesn't, and like, it might just be because you're built differently and your teeth are a certain shape, so it resonates in your skull a weird way. Do you know what I mean? It could be your build-up. Yeah, like, rather than, I don't know, like, I'm generally into punk, like, or this. It might even just be genetic build-up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's this idea as well, isn't it, of music being like a primal thing.
For sure.
Like, it taps into, there's this idea, I can't remember what it is, but there's this idea that there are certain natural sounds in the world that spark things in you, and then when you kind of hear them in a similar fashion in music, it kind of achieves the same response in your brain.
Yeah. And that's nuts, isn't it? And also, once you have that emotion, you've always got it, and you're almost basically playing music to get that nostalgia of the feeling you had once you first heard it. It's a weird one, because me and Rich were talking about how, obviously we always talk about, like, what the fuck is music? And I think the only thing we do is because
it's a good name for an album.
What the fuck
is music?
That's a good name. I think because we used to just write songs, and now we're sort of writing albums, and now we're playing live, and you sort of think a bit more about it, and you're like, oh shit, like, this might be a job. Like, should we go and study it? Like, should we really go to town on what the hell is going on? And that usually just turns into a drunk conversation. But we sort of got to the point and we were just like, it's just nostalgia. Because I read somewhere that I think it's after maybe 25 or 28, you stop listening to new music and sort of just build up a catalogue of sounds and things you've found or enjoyed. And then we'll only really listen to their new albums or their sort of bands that you might have listened to ages ago but sort of rekindled your love for, or their new album. So it's not like you're going to find a 50-year-old now who's just be like, man, trap music is my living. Like, do you know what I mean? It's not like you're going to be as excited because your brain has automatically made up its musical preference. And so with that in mind, it's like you almost have to literally write as much music as possible in a short amount of time to sort of captivate that inner creative child or whatever's inside you that wants to create. Because in 10 years' time, you're probably not going to be even like the same music, and you probably cringe at some of the stuff you put out, which is a weird thought, isn't it?
Yeah. I think whenever you put yourself into your future self's shoes, it's a weird situation because you have no idea what it's going to look like or what who you're going to be as a person or whatever. It
is weird. But do you think that? I mean, because I remember always being younger. I remember vividly hating classical music and would always be like, who would listen to classical music? Like, what are you getting from that? And now it's like the pinnacle. I'm like, holy fuck, this is insane. It's like, and this is 400 years old? What? It's nuts. And then if you want to go into frequencies, how the hell did they piece together an orchestra? Like, think how long that would have taken to be like, this works with this, and this works with this, and this works with this. And now we're 300 years or whatever in the future, hitting a fucking metal disc and some pigskins. It's like whacking a drum kit. Yeah, thinking that's the best thing.
There's something about classical music, though. I think that part of the reason it's timeless is that it doesn't need one performer as well, because it had to be recorded by being written down and anyone could play it. And obviously, some people, put their own spin on it, but there's almost something about it that's more universal in that sense, and that anyone can kind of pick it up and do their own thing with it. We're speaking about covers earlier, but it's not really the same. Like, if you're doing a cover, you kind of have to change it.
That's something different, though, isn't it? I think that in itself is you only want to hear covers in classical music. But even then, though, if you've heard a version of someone do, I don't know, for instance, what's well known, like Claire de Lune, it's like you will have your version of that song that you really like, and then every time you hear it differently played by another orchestra, you probably won't like it because you're like, what are they doing with this section or that section? It's like people do. That's probably why I was saying I don't like covers or whatever. It's like, but I could hear the cover first and hate the original. It sort of depends which way around it is. I think once you've got a sort of distinctive flavour or understanding of the reasons you like the details, it's the same way that, when bands sort of come out and they're brand new and they've got a sick EP and then they re-record those songs from the EP to put on the album and you don't like them?
Yeah. I usually find that I like them within the context of the album, but prefer the initial one as a song on its own.
Exactly. And you would talk to that artist and go, why? This is way better. What? Because I think we always talk about it because there's songs that we've recorded and you're like, maybe I should change this or do it. I think I had that with Mundungus and I was like, I want to remix it or put it through something else. You kind of can't though, because it's the initial impact of what it had is already there and it's already building its nostalgia factor because people have heard that in certain contexts or a certain place and they've grown an emotion with it already. So by changing it, you're eradicating all that feeling towards that piece of music.
When did Mundungus initially come out?
I had that in the bank I wrote that song or the riff in Melbourne of 2017, I want to think. And we were supposed to put it on, I think it was around the recording part 2. And I just sort of left it because I was like, it's a joke. And I remember going from part 1 and part 2, I was in such you're in your wanky magnum opus mindset where everything has to be brilliant. And it's sort of it's a joke. So now I'm sort of just back into sort of a bit more of a, just trying to have fun, I suppose, mentality. But that was recorded about 2 years ago, I think. And that was the first song we did with Sam at Tone City. Because I think the production on that song is way better than the rest of the album. And I went back into it. I was like, why is it? Why does those guitar sound good? Like, that's right, because we recorded it all in the studio and it's professionally done. And then you listen to the stuff I do at home and I'm like, why doesn't mine sound like that? So it was like, everything's a learning curve.
Like, at the start of Mundunga, so you kind of have that moment of, not silence, but it's almost, like fiddling about as the song kind of gears up and then it bursts into action.
At
the very beginning of it. Yeah. When do you kind of add those moments to breathe in an album? Because you have them you kind of have these moments where it kind of stops for just a second, we kind of catch our breath and then we're off again. When do you kind of get a sense of the shape as a whole and figure out where to place them?
That's a good question. I think a lot of the time you'll get carried away recording too much. And I think the pace of a record is obviously something that I thought way more about this time round. And I think it's just over listening. Like sometimes if you listen to an album from start to finish, it's like, do you feel satisfied? It's like a meal. Are you hungry again, or do you want more, or are you like, was that too much? Like, and I think that sort of pace, like, because I remember after listening to Glitterbug, so from Hats Off to the Green Bins, the idea was always for that to go into Glitterbug and have that sort of nice ending D and sail off into Glitterbug. And because those drums were so like repetitive almost, me and Jelly like intentionally mixed the snare and drums so at the end of the song they're hidden, because it's just such a like sort of this chugging rhythm. And we're like, if you could hear that, it's like you almost need to hear the drums once and then never again for the rest of the song, because you already know with a repetitive rhythm like that, it's because your brain is interpreting it, and so you can hide it a bit more and bring out extra detail afterwards. So the intention of that, and afterwards I remember it going straight into Pukebox and I was like, it's straight back in, it's too quick, and maybe Pukebox feels slow now because of that. And then obviously More Glitter was sort of the touch that we sort of added or sort of thought about with the Mellotron to give it more of a calming gap or pause or a breath. Like even if it's 30 seconds, it's sort of like it lets the listener breathe, but it also allows you to sort of take in what has just happened. And I think you don't want it to be like longer than 10 minutes, but you also don't want one every like 3 or 4. So it's sort of that perfect 8 to 10 minutes, I think, where it is just a little delay or a little pause. Or so maybe you just have 4 moments like that in one 45-minute album, but it's enough to break it all up. But I also didn't want to put in like a slow song. Like I like a lot of my favorite albums, they will just be like, and here's the slow part of the album. You're like, oh fuck, you did so well. It's like just didn't need that. Only the Vines have done that well. That Highly Evolved record where it's like just transferring from this to that to this to that, and I haven't really heard it too much in other records where it's like once you set the pace, it's like you don't want to bring it down. And just because you've wrote a slow song, it's like save it for a slow album. And I think that's what I've sort of learned with this. It's like everything needs to be its own flavour.
Yeah, I mean, even though you don't have a slow song, something like Mango Terrarium does feel a little bit more restrained, maybe, almost is the word. But as you're kind of, until you get to that ending where it kind of ascends and you've got Forever, it's kind of, you feel, there's a kind of a tension builds and then you unleash it when you come in with the climax. Yeah,
and I think that riff is such it's just such a classic 70s shuffle of like, it reminded me of like an ELO kind of track or something that, I don't know, Neil Young would kind of play, but or Thin Lizzy almost. That was the sort of response to that, because after that you've got obviously Round the Corner, and you had Mundungus beforehand, where it was, I think because it was so heavy that it needed something just to transition it into a more, like bring it back to upbeat, fun, jiving, hillbilly times. Like I don't know a better word to put in, but that to me, I get what you're saying as well, and maybe that's probably why, without even thinking, I made the end like extend and go a bit heavier, because I wasn't satisfied.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to the overall rhythm of the album as well, though. Like it kind of ebbs and flows in that way, if that makes sense. Like it feels like a natural thing for the ending to ascend in that direction.
Yeah. That to me is like that part of the record. Like every time I'd go back and listen to it, I'd be like, would get a little shiver on the back of my neck when that sort of peak of Mango Terrarium came up. So I was like, do you either put it last and crescendo with it, or do you sort of calm down slowly? And I think because it came up slowly, it felt like a nice way to maybe peak the album there, have Round the Corner, and then sort of jettison off again in with Gurney Gridman. But have that slow decline, sort of where it goes into halftime and then even slower, and then it comes back into the acoustic that you first hear in Big Dijon. But that was the only time I recorded it on a different microphone and made the vocals clean and made sure that last part sounded a bit more hi-fi. So like almost like a drug trip wearing off, where reality's back to normal and you're just like, oh shit, that's right, I live here. Like this is my existence. Yeah, so it just felt like a nice clean way to end it.
Yeah, it's almost like a little Pink Floydy as well, especially with the thing you're kind of doing with the samples, kind of Wish You Were Here style.
Yeah, that mate, what track? The talking has always been a favourite thing of mine because of it's just I think Beatles did it so well in Magical Mystery Tour. Yeah, Day in the Life as well, and like I Am the Walrus, and even like there's that track Flying or whatever, and they've got the sort of yeah, that's it. It sounds like they're just sort of humming along, and but in a way that you're there with them. And it's Rish found a really interesting. It was like a '60s documentary on terrariums, or how terrariums are made, and so we just got, and it was this old English cob, like, you know, that really interesting accent, yeah, and classic radio voice. So he'd reversed that. And it was just like, I just remember being like, that's insane, like, chuck that in. And you know, like, when you're listening to it, it just swirls around and builds and until you get so high pitched that fucking sounds like dogs are going to come running to you. But leaving that voice in just felt like a really nice, yeah, like you said, a nod to sort of Pink Floyd or the Beatles.
It's interesting what you were saying as well, that you were kind of initially, maybe, when you listen back to it now, you think, should Mango Terrarium have been the closer? Because I was just thinking at that there. But when you think of Gurney Gridman, it doesn't really have the same almost kind of hope and positivity that Gurney Gridman does, which is probably why it works as a closer. Yeah, for sure. And I think that the obviously shouting forever or having that as sort of your mantra, it just felt like such a nice lift, and that you weren't expecting anything afterwards. So when Round the Corner does come in, it's such a interesting piece of music that you're listening almost more intently to, which is weird, because I remember if you played like a song after it, you were still feeling Mango Terrarium. Do you know what I mean? You're still having that emotional attachment to the last track, so you don't want to come in with like a big thing. You almost want to glide away from it slowly. If you're putting a conflict and emotion in there, it's like you're automatically just going to skip it, or you're going to stop the album, or do you know what I mean? Sometimes you hear such a good song, you're like, holy fuck, I need a break. Like, that is what just happened. Like, and I think, as I said, sort of working up to that part in Mango Terrarium, that Round the Corner just felt like a really nice segue to slow it down before it did just sort of zoom back up and it's sort of back with a heavy guitar. You have the two parts to Gurney Gridman as well, though it kind of shifts halfway through. Was that two ideas kind of mushed together, or how did that kind of structural shift emerge in the songwriting process?
I was trying to. I remember being like, because it was generally the last song I wrote, and I was like, this album needs to finish, because it sort of did finish at Mango Terrarium, and I was like you said, sort of almost not digestively happy, like, what, there's something I'm missing here, there's something that needs to sort of go in. And I was like, what song? And I sort of looked at songs. I was like, what song would be great? And I was like, fucking listening to loads of Queen. I was like, mate, Bohemian Rhapsody, if that song that would go anywhere on a record, you would put it in your top 10. It's just such a magnificent tune. I was like, why do I like that? Why do I want to sort of, like, what brings me back to it? And I think the fact that it is weird as fuck, quirky, kind of ballady, kind of strange. And I was like, not trying to attempt to write a Bohemian Rhapsody, but something that just transitioned from the pace of the record, like I said, to sort of something that ended in a way that you were satisfied. And I think that long outro of that song I'd had for a while and was going to put on. I've always thought about, I don't know, do the, what's the word? The pretentious acoustic solo record where you're like, here's me and my feelings. But you're like, I don't know, it just seems like something I was like, I kind of don't want to. And I was working on that Gurney Gridman track, and I loved the intro, loved the sort of the middle part. And then as soon as I put the acoustic guitar into the sort of glitch mode, it just shimmered, and it was like, fuck, that's like more beautiful than the rest of the album. I was like, how do can I go back and change it? And I was already finished at that point. It was sort of like almost in the last week of conceptualizing and to be like, before we sort of really had to go ham on mixing. So I was like, let's make it. There's about 7 minutes more music after that, where it just went spiraling again into something else. And I remember being like, nah, I can't put that in. It's like, it just sort of didn't need it. You're already satisfied, I think. And I think that was, for me, it was like, all right, I'm done. And I don't think I've felt that on a record since part one, where it was like, shit, that's it, it's finished. Which is such a nice feeling. I think if it wasn't for COVID, I probably would have put out something really weird. Yeah,
I guess as well, because there's so much self-reflection in that last song, that's maybe what gives it its sense of closure.
Yeah, and it's almost it's a little tongue-in-cheek as well, isn't it? It's like you're just talking about drinking and all these big nights and all these sort of like mad weekends throughout the album, and sort of tour life and have an intervention or whatever. And then it's sort of at the end of it, it's like a voice of an old man, like almost like your 80-year-old self, but like, don't worry, mate. It's like, live while you're young, like just go for it now. Which kind of gives it a cheerful outlook, because I could have ended it and be like, now I'm like morbidly obese from all the alcohol I've been drinking, and my liver's fucked, and I'm an alcoholic. And it could have just turned into this horrible, like, oh God, like the bad look at alcoholism by Jack McEwan. Like, but it just was sort of a nice way to reflect it, and have it, instead of looking at all the negatives of alcohol or looking at all the negatives of whatever. It's like, there's a reason it's been in society for fucking millennia. Like every culture has a version of alcohol, or I mean most places ban it because they're like, fuck, this is hectic. Everyone's themselves, and then it just is a recipe for disaster. But it was kind of nice. It was almost like an Australian way of, or my coming of age here in Australia and being like, all right, because it's probably the same as Scotland. I think we both have quite a big drinking culture. Yeah, but it isn't frowned upon, which is kind of nice. So it's like you can get away with singing and talking about literally getting like ruined, and you're like, ha ha ha, you kind of laugh it off. Whereas, I mean, you wouldn't want to be saying that in other countries.
Yeah, I guess when you're kind of tackling it earlier on in the record, it can be a little bit tongue-in-cheek as well sometimes, like having a song, Puke Box, about drinking moonshine, and then following it up straight away with the intervention, Mundungus. It's quite kind of self-aware, if that makes sense. Yeah, for sure. I think that's the two sort of, I mean, what's the intro Polosaur? It's like getting used to waking up and feeling rough, and you sort of... that just throwback to tour life, and you're like, and then obviously it was like, I really liked the way the lyrics almost could be a narrative, and as you sort of read them, or if you're listening to the album, it's like you really do get a sense of that kind of tie to being like, I suppose most people, I mean, you never know when's enough and what's too much, and when is it like, when you go, all right, I'll stop drinking when I'm 30, all right, I'll stop drinking when I'm 35, all right, I'll stop doing this. I mean, it's sort of like this, self-aware, robot trying to make a 70s rock record. But he's like, all right, sweet. But it's also young enough that I reckon I'll look back on it and, I don't know. It feels like it captures a time. Yeah, when I am a bit older, I'll be like, wow, like that happened, like, and that's what was going on. And I think I was really proud that sort of did do it justice, at least. And it sort of captures the excitement of what we did go through before COVID, and obviously touring. It was such an amazing experience. So I think that was the only way to give it justice, really. Yeah. Tropolosaur, though, you mentioned that. It's such a direct, probably the most direct song on the record, maybe.
Yeah.
There's less of the kind of fantastical to it, and it's very upfront about a certain kind of experience and part of your life.
Yeah, and I did like that fact, because I remember when I wrote that, I was like, "This is the best song I've ever wrote. Oh, it's the best song I've ever wrote." I was just like, and then sort of as it sort of progressed, I was like, "All right, how do I sort of do it?" And I just fucked the production a little bit on that one. I was like, and I've been meaning, I've been like, I should change it, and then I was like, I can't. It's like, it's done. But just to clean up the very beginning would be a dream. But obviously I'm sure everyone can find faults in whatever they do, but the lyrics I was really happy with, because it's like, yeah, it's this guy who's like waking up feeling I've changed, what is it, been drinking gin or whatever, changed to rum, and I'm back on rum. I can't remember what the lyrics are, but I should remember what the lyrics are. But it's funny, like he's trying to work out why he's feeling like shit, and the listener is like, well, it's clear, well, your life is shit. You're like, but he's waiting for his velvet morning, which I felt that was a nice way of describing, like, to be comfy, to wake up and generally feel like you are 100% happy with your life decisions and you're healthy and how your life is planning out. But there is no way that you think like that when you're drunk. Like, you do when you're drunk, but when you wake up in the morning, it's almost like a 180-degree flip. So
that's what the Terrors is about.
Exactly, yeah. And I think every song's about it, really, isn't it? It's like, yeah. But
apart from
works.
Mr. Prism.
Yeah, there you go, Mr. Prism. I've wrote about something else.